Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Medieval Engineers. Now, in the last update video, I made an assumption that they had fixed one of the main issues I've been having with siege engines, and I had intended, with this video, to show another one of my siege engine designs. It turns out that the assumption was not true. My assumption being that they had fixed a main problem I was having, and the reason I thought that is because the patch notes said that it had improved or fixed collision detection between timbers and stones. And through that update video, I demonstrated that a siege engine that previously didn't work at all was finally functioning for the first time. But after further experimentation, working with that siege engine, trying to tweak it to get it to work a little bit better, I was easily able to replicate the old problem I had been having. And that problem is that the timber beams have a habit of clipping through each other when they're moving at high speeds. When they clip through each other like that, they move past each other like they're not even there, and that makes the siege engine not work, because this siege engine, as well as some of my other ideas, depend upon that interaction between the two beams, them striking each other, to get the siege engine to function. As a result of that siege engine not functioning, I can't really progress forward. And it's that stability that's the real problem. In some instances, I'm able to get a siege engine to kind of work. I do some tweaks to it, and then suddenly the premise that was working doesn't work because of these glitches. So that's kind of a problem, and I'm going to still have to put aside the siege engines. But another thing I noticed while doing some experimentation is some of my old siege engine designs no longer function as they originally did. For instance, as you saw in that update video, I had one where there was a beam that struck a stone, and obviously it's supposed to propel the stone by hitting it. Well, all that happened was the stone and the beam both shattered. So if that's what they meant by improving or fixing the collision detection, at least this time the stone and the timber were actually contacting each other rather than just passing through each other like they're not there. Yes, they're contacting each other, but the end result is that they both just shatter, which is not really what I'm looking for. And as a result, a lot of my old siege engines that depended upon a mechanic of a beam striking the projectile, all that happens now is both the projectile and the beam just explode into shards, and that's it. Doesn't work anymore. Another thing I noticed is this basic catapult, which used to work just fine, has kind of an issue, and we'll show that off here in a second. And that issue is that it isn't nearly as stable anymore as it used to be. And I don't know if they changed some things with the way the physics work in the game, but the interaction of this siege engine is nowhere near the way it used to be. So let's go ahead and load this catapult up, and I can demonstrate very quickly what I mean, if it will actually load. There we go. And let's go ahead and shoot it off. And you notice right away how the catapult kind of leapt up there. In that leaping motion, it lost a lot of its power. And as we can see, even though we're pretty close range, this catapult struggled to even hit the wall. Again, as I said, I'm seeing a change in the dynamics of my old siege engines since last I visited them. So a lot of my old siege engines don't work very well. One siege engine that appears to work all right is my old super catapult, which we will be demonstrating. But the main purpose of this video and what I want to strive to do is something that I have been meaning to do for some time. I have realized that they have changed the structural integrity of a lot of the blocks in game. They're not nearly as easy to break as they used to be. So I thought it might be a good idea to see how structural integrity works now with these walls. So I guess their resilience to these siege weapons. So I think I'm just going to fire off the super catapult, see if it's still effective. But then we're just going to go back, go through with the essentially the tool, and see how these different walls respond to these siege attacks or the projectiles. And give a kind of comparison to the way it used to be. If you look at some of my old tests where I did exactly the same thing, I went down the line of these different wall structures and saw how they stood up. So in any case, let's go ahead and load up this catapult here. I'm going to only probably fire it off once or twice I just want to see how does the super catapult work compared to the way it used to work. So we have that go forward. As we saw, very much more stable. And it struck, and I believe where it struck was the solid block. So this is, and if we can even see in here, this is essentially a solid, one of the solid complete stone walls. It hit that, and the super catapult was not able to destroy that block, which is interesting because in my initial testing, I hit this area here, which is essentially the curved walls, but they're the thinner walls, so it's essentially hollow after this initial outer layer. And the super catapult was able to break through it, not nearly as destructively as it used to, but it was able to break through it. But when we hit the solid wall, it looks like it pretty much absorbed that impact pretty well. Let's see if we can strike that area I was talking about and see if we can replicate that same kind of damage. So I'm going to turn the super catapult a little bit here. And let's see how we're aimed. All right, it looks like we're kind of aiming for that area. I'm going to push it just a little bit more. So if you have some old siege engines, one lesson we're going to learn here is that you're probably going to have to stabilize it somewhat similar to the way I stabilized the super catapult, which had a problem with stability back in its original design that I had to work around. So that's the reason why it's so stable. Okay, so we've got that cocked back. I think I can go back a little bit further than that. There we go. And let's go ahead and load it up. Let's see how it responds to this wall. So I'm going to go ahead and fire it and move aside so we can see it strike. And there it hit, and it looks like we had the same kind of, yeah, we're seeing that it actually did break through the wall. So apparently it does all right with just these thinner walls. Let's see about a flat thinner wall, though. Let's see how it responds to that. So we're going to have fired off one more time. So the section I hit here was the thicker walls, but over to the right is going to be thinner walls. So we're going to aim it a little bit more to the right here. Unfortunately, the catapult is not really moving very well. It looks... Come on. Maybe we push it on this side. There we go. Not sure why pushing it on one side didn't work, but pushing it on the other did. Okay. Hopefully we're aimed appropriately here. Let's go ahead and check out our aim. Maybe a little bit too far over, because we're probably going to hit the sloped wall here, which I don't want to hit, and I'm going to assume it's not going to do a whole lot of damage to. And then we'll go ahead and go down the line and test our other walls. But you can see the super catapult, which is quite a powerful catapult, is struggling to get through the same walls that it used to be able to easily destroy. So that is one thing we're going to have to kind of prepare ourselves for when we're attacking a castle in the current version of the game. That might still be aimed a little bit too far to the right. Let's nudge it a little bit more. There we go. Hopefully that's on target now. And it looks like it's about in the middle of that wall. Whether or not it will hit it, we'll have to see. Okay, pull it back. And I don't know if that's all the way back. Let's just make sure. There we go. And we want a new stone. There we go. Let's fire her off. And move aside so we can see the impact. Okay, now that seemed to glance off. Now that is definitely the thinner wall. Oh, okay, it did go crack through, so it is different than this. So the solid block was able to absorb the blow, so we can see it just kind of has that little texture on it to show that it was took damage, but it still withstood it, and it's still a complete block. It's not been cracked. But here we see that we've actually cracked through the wall. So this wall block has been more or less damage to the point that any further damage will just break right through it. So we can see essentially with the super catapult, which as I said is a very powerful catapult, is not able to get through these walls nearly as well as it used to. So let's go ahead, let's grab the tool here and just kind of see how these walls respond. So essentially, I'm going to do 3 counts in my head silently every time I fire one of these off, and just see how we get response-wise now to our walls. So, all right. I might have held that down a little bit longer than I intended to. Let's try that again. Okay, so with a 3 count, I'm able to crack the sloped walls pretty well. Now, you have to keep in mind, with the range I'm at and the power these are coming out with a 3 count is going to be a lot higher than we're even seeing out of a super catapult. So these are, you know, a little bit on the unrealistic realms of what you're going to get out of a siege weapon. Let's see how these windows do. So same 3 count. Okay, obviously that destroyed it very easily. All right, now let's get to a flat wall section. All right. So we can see this is a little bit more destructive. Maybe I should go down to a 2 count and see how that responds. So, okay, that might be a little bit more realistic. All right, so it's not doing nearly as much damage. Let's hit another part of this wall and see how it responds. The only problem is, what part of the wall isn't damaged yet? Okay, so it still seems to essentially give us more or less the same kind of damage with the 2 count. I mean, a little bit less than the 3 count, but it looks like roughly the same kind of damage. Let's see how we do on the solid wall. So we're seeing the same results we saw with the super catapult. Let's see how many strikes it takes in that spot. All right, so it took 3 strikes in the exact same spot to get it to crumble. So we can see how much more resilient these walls are. And this is going to be challenging for your siege engines to get through a wall, but it's going to require repeated strikes in the same spot, which usually from what I've seen of the siege engines, they're going to lack that accuracy a lot of the time. So let's see how our curved wall does with a 2 count. Okay, seemingly this is like the worst performer, which is interesting considering how it used to be better than your straight walls. So apparently straight walls are better than curved walls. Interesting to see. So if we go over here, now we've got solid curved walls. So we're going to go ahead and do a 2 count. And we see that that cracked right away, whereas the flat wall was able to resist it. Let's see if we hit it at an angle, if the curved wall is a little bit better. So I'm going to hit it at an angle. We'll go ahead and go on the thinner thickness here first. So I'm going to hit it at an angle. Maybe with the slope at an angle will help us. Okay, it seemingly did a little bit less damage than it did when it was straight on. I mean, obviously when it was straight on, it completely exploded. So the slope does take care of it a little bit. Let's try and hit it on the slope again. Yeah, that seemingly does better than it did when it was just straight on to the middle of the curve. But the question is this doing any better than the flat wall was doing? It's kind of hard to say. I would say no. All right, let's go to the more solid wall and hit it on the slope. Okay, here we're seeing what we were seeing with the flat wall, where it did damage, but it is still intact. Let's hit it again. Only on the second strike did it break. So we had 3 strikes with a flat wall and only 2 with a curved wall. So it looks like the curved walls are actually less structurally sound than the flat walls, which is interesting and probably not logical. Moving along, we have a little bit of the larger sloped wall. I am going to assume that this is going to do even worse, but let's just go ahead and do a 2 count on it. We're going to do flat on first. And obviously we see it just exploded. All right, so let's do another section of the wall, and let's do it on a curve. So, and again, we see that it does better than if you just hit it essentially dead center, but it still is breaking, I would say, about the same as a flat wall, but that's on its slope that it's breaking like that. So that's very interesting. So I guess my recommendation with the structural integrity as it is, don't build round structures, build flat structures. Again, I know that doesn't make any logical sense, but from what I'm seeing from these tests, that seems to be the route to go. So, as I said, I've been dying to do this, and it's been quite a while that I've put this off, but finally we get to see how the new structural integrity stands up against your different attacks and which walls are better. Essentially, it looks like flat walls are going to be one of your big. I mean, it's going to be your better option than the rounded walls. Now, slopes are probably still king as far as I'm concerned with structural integrity, but it looks like it took maybe even worse damage than these flat walls. I mean, as you saw with the flat wall, it took 3 strikes in the same area before it broke. Whereas with this, I mean, we'll do a 2 count. It breaks right away. Let's see if we have the same dynamic if we hit the same spot like we used to get with sloped walls, that it doesn't do any further damage, though. Yes, it does appear to be the case. So while that crumbled wall section is there, I can keep hitting the same spot over and over and over again. And it doesn't go any further beyond this point, which is one of the big advantages to these sloped walls. So sloped walls might still be king in that regard, but you have to consider how much more material this sloped wall takes to build. It takes quite a lot. Whereas just a flat wall like that, not nearly as much, but seemingly pretty structurally sound. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.